So, why did we start this idea of trying to make bread from our own grain here grown in Montana? And how do you go about doing that? Well, one of the first things you resort to a couple cookbooks. Of course, Betty Crocker always has lots of advice on different things that you do. And I had to entice someone to come and help me. And the way to do it is get some wine. But a big part of why we started was because we had this machine at our house. And this machine is quite the machine. Here you can see we're putting it together. It's a machine that's worth several thousands of dollars. And it goes together pretty easily, as you can see, as we start putting this together here. Put the top on. You can see this is where the grinder is going to happen. And this is an important piece we forgot to put in for a while, but it will hold the grain in when it starts being thrown back out of the machine. Inside the book is a description of the flours. An important part about this machine is the size of the grids. The size of the grids that you use to make the flour. And you make all sorts of different types of things. We had to use the second smallest grid for making this type of flour from the wheat. Here we're trying to assemble it. Some things don't go together too well, and finally go read the instructions again. We're still playing around with it. Here it is now. We can declare success. It looks like it's in. There it is. There's in. And here's the wheat. The wheat from Montana. 3 different bags full in a half-bushel bag. You can see it's beautiful wheat, Montana Gold, as they call it. And one of the first steps my assistant here did was to have to clean the grain. She was quite surprised at this. They had to clean them. I said, John Deere combine isn't perfect. There's some things that get in. Mostly it's what you'll see here, little shards of oats that get involved in the wheat. Feeding the grain into the machine. How did that go? Have any comments on how that went together?
That was easy.
It was easy.
Easy part.
Then, here's the big deal. I wouldn't do it, but I let my assistant turn on the machine, thinking the disaster was going to happen, but actually, it started grinding up the wheat. And much to our amazement, powder started coming out. Not very fast. You can see it just trickling out there, but it started looking like a very interesting powder. And continuing to fill the machine with our wheat from Montana. And here's the fine powder that's coming out of there. This is the tailings, or the material other than grain, it's called. Sometimes then. So after the flour, now we start to make some wheat bread. And here inside of our cookbook describes that. First thing you need to do is get some yeast to make that. And we start with dry yeast, add some water. You have to wait about 5 minutes to make sure the yeast is alive. It should start bubbling and moving around a little bit on you. And an important part of this as well is using both white flour and wheat flour. We went with a 50-50 mixture, and maybe it was an idea which way we should work out best, but we very precisely measured this wheat out. You see the fine wheat flour that we made with the previous machine. And here we first start hand mixing it, adding the water, built a little bit of slurry. The assistant is working very hard here, doing all of the work.
We're not sure who the assistant is.
Yes. And the mixer. The theme was with bread you should do this all by hand, but we found this mixer and it seems to be very good at mixing flour. Maybe it's not authentic flour, but...
the flour is authentic.
Flour is authentic, but the mixer, making bread, this is the more modern way of doing it. It takes a 2-hour process down to maybe 20 minutes. But it mixes and mixes and mixes, and you can see, until you get the right consistency. And we kept watching and watching this mix and mix. It's a lot of mixing. Here we go. We think we've got now the dough. It's done. You have to put a little oil in a pan just to let it rise. We're trying to let the bread now rise after we get done mixing it. And here it is with a little oil, and we let it sit. Now, of course, we let it rise for an hour or two, so there's a lot of time for cleanup here. You can see we've had a little bit of mess that happened. Got to get the dust buster out, pick up all the kernels of grain that didn't get ground up that came out the top of the machine. Here's our bread. Has been risen a little bit. And we got to be able to make 2 loaves. There's one, and there's a second loaf. going into the oven. Continue to let those rise a little bit as they sit there, and then eventually you have to cook them at 2 different settings in the oven. First for 450 degrees, and then a second setting for 350 degrees. It allows, what was the deal? It was allowed the bottom to form a crust or
Right,
something.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Some sort of argument about those 2 different temperatures. And here we are, after this 40 minutes of baking. Here's our 2 first loaves of bread made from Montana wheat. And you let them cool a little bit. And they actually do look like bread. It's kind of amazing. Now we cut into it, and it actually does cut. It really does cut. Look at that. It's kind of a miracle. And, well, it's hot. It's kind of hot. We should be waiting for it to cool off, but look at that. Our first loaf of bread made from Montana wheat. And a bite. Look at that. And I think they said it tasted very good. And then we finally made a meal for the bread. And here's another sample of beef stew with the bread, freshly made bread.